Surfing's a difficult sport. There's a lot of things going on, but it's also an Olympic sport. And unlike most other Olympic sports, it really has no idea how to train itself. Something I know a bit about, not only as a lifelong surfer, I've worked with pro surfers, as a former head coach of the Australian adaptive surf team, and I've seen what is going on at the top levels of coaching and what is right and wrong. To be honest, it's more about what is wrong. In this video, I want to talk about what surfing needs and why most surfers aren't doing what they really need if they want to improve their surfing and stay in surfing for longer. Let's start by talking a little bit about the research. Some years ago, 2012, a study concluded it was really hard to underpin what surfing training needed because there was a lack of evidence and a lack of study. And since surfing became an Olympic sport in 2021, we're still in the same boat, really. Every other sport has decades of methodology behind it. You know, tennis players will see tennis coaches, rugby players, rugby coaches in most cases. And no one really questions the methodology because it's been very standardized over the years. And surfing should be in a better place than borrowing from these other sports, which is what is happening in a lot of cases. Or worse, we see pro surfers just visiting some random PT in the hope that they're going to get what they need to be a world champion, be competitive, or just stay in surfing. And when it comes to jumping on trends, one of the ones that really does bother me a little bit is the Bosu ball. I guess the logic's reasonable. People will see surfing as an unstable sport, so we should train it on an unstable surface. But one thing to consider is that when we're training on an unstable surface, we lose 70% of our possible force output. And I'll comment on this a little bit more in a minute, but lower body strength is a very important variable in surfing performance. One other thing to consider here in terms of the Bosu ball and the correlation between surfing as an unstable sport, as we generate speed on board, the surface actually becomes much more stable. And a 2015 study showed that there wasn't really any correlation between Bosu ball training and training on the surfboard in terms of our stability. And the argument usually for the Bosu ball is that it's neurological training, but that study showed that it just didn't correlate. There has been some research in terms of stability and balance training for surfers, and a Chinese study did show some crossover between TRX-based stability exercises and improved performance in surfing. So there probably is a place for improving stability and balance, and we should note that stability and balance are probably two separate things, but that's another whole tangent itself. But in many cases, if we're training on a Bosu ball, we're probably training to be better on a Bosu ball. There's probably not a huge amount of crossover in doing that sort of training and seeing it show up in your surf. What the research has showed us is important is lower body strength. A paper that looked at things like counter movement jump, squat strength, etc., showed a very strong correlation between lower body strength and scoring in maneuvers in competition. And it should be somewhat logical that surfing requires a lot of lower body force production. And sure, balance and stability are prerequisites in order to compete in the sport, but one would assume that once you're doing the sport, you probably have the levels of balance and stability that you need. If we consider that force production is important in our lower body, we should note that training on a Bosu ball reduces 70% of your force production capacity. That means you're only doing 30% of your possible work if you are training on a Bosu ball. Like any sport, we need to consider the ability to access certain positions. Some years ago, 15 years ago, I came up with a product called Shake Your Surfing that I did with another surfer, which fell apart for whatever reason. But in that, we were looking at the shapes that surfers need to find themselves in, and they need to be able to access. This requires that your body is capable of efficiently entering these positions. So one of the best things that a surfer can do is ensure that their range of motion, strength through that range of motion, etc., allow them to enter these positions easily. This means that the best coach or the best cueing in the world isn't going to be able to put your body into a position that you can't easily find. And so it's no surprise that mobility has become a big thing within the surfing circles, but there is a lot wrong with it. Again, it's borrowing a lot of things that look good on Instagram, and these things like the world's greatest stretch and thoracic opening and these sort of things are good and they can play their place. But unfortunately, if you have any sort of limitation in accessing these positions, just doing them isn't going to make you better at it. We need to first understand where the restriction may be, treat the restriction, improve the restriction, and use these movement-based things where we're opening and rotating, etc., to reinforce our brain on how to use the muscle in these positions. Because if we can't own our range of motion here, we're not strong in our range of motion, there's no point teaching our brain to access these because our range of motion is different under different conditions, whether that's in the gym, we might get better at an exercise, but it will change depending on fatigue, speed, load, and all these sorts of things that we're going to throw at our body. We need to be able to access that range on all these different things and looking at something that looks pretty cool on Instagram and then throwing it into competitive surfing at the elite end is just ridiculous. Surfers deserve better than this, and we need to put our exercises in order and understand the progression of how to get a surfer from somewhat restricted or not moving quite well to performing through their full range efficiently at the top end of performance. The other problem is when we see these sort of exercises on Instagram where we're rotating, etc., we can certainly make an exercise look like the exercise, but we may not be training what we think we are training. It's important that we first work on patterns of movement and ensure that the muscles that we want to target are being used in these exercises. Too many people are looking at these exercises on Instagram, copying them, and they look the same, but they might have a completely different muscle pattern in terms of executing the movement itself. Now, there's one thing in particular I have not heard anybody really talking about that much, despite the fact that there is research that exists in terms of ankle range of motion and its importance on improving surfing ability and competitiveness. It's still not something that we see show up in training programs. But even more importantly is the ability of the rear foot to evert. That is to kind of look like it's collapsing inwards, for want of a better description. And this was one of the big keys in this program that I created some years ago. If we can't bring our foot in that position, we can't allow our knee to come in and we can't allow our hips to come in, and we're no longer facing down the line. Our chest doesn't want to face towards the front. Our whole body wants to face towards the wave, and going front side anyway, wants to face towards the wave, and we end up in this poo man stance without the ability to rotate and set our position and also transfer our weight from front to back and in the opposite motion as well. So while everyone's thinking about rotating up here, if we don't have that movement in our feet, something has to give. And this is the same too for landing airs and landing maneuvers where we're having to absorb impact. If we can't move through the ankle, we're only going to be able to absorb at our hips. That could mean maybe not quite making the maneuver, or it could also mean copying it in the knees, and we see a lot of knee injuries as a result of some of these impact landings. We need to be able to absorb through the whole chain. That means movement at the ankles, knees, hips, etc. So there's certainly a lot to think about in terms of what we should be doing if we want to train surfing. If we think about a position that we often see online like this, where we're stepping in and out of, I guess, a down the line surfing sort of position, whether that's coming in or out of a maneuver, we do see this sort of thing a lot. And if we can break this down joint by joint, we can start to understand what we should be training. So we first look at the hips. The hips are going to need a reasonable amount of internal and external rotation. So the first thing we need to ensure is that we can access this range of motion, and we can do that through a variety of different positions. We then also want to make sure that we're strong in this range of motion. And a great technique here can be applying isometrics, applying tension at that end range, because this also allows our brain to understand that we own this position. This means that when we're coming into positions where that demands internal and external rotation of the pelvis, our body's going to give it to us and we can use it in these larger movements. On that note, and this is how we would do it in Stretch Yourself Strong, that would be a phase 1 strategy. Phase 2, we want to start to teach our brain how to use it. Now, I said before, moving in and out of these ranges isn't going to make you better. We will use these sort of exercises, but they're a neurological exercise. We're trying to train our brain to take command of these ranges of motion that we have gained. Stage, we're reinforcing that we can use this range of motion, and we can see it cross over into our real life. We don't want to get good at exercises for the sake of exercises. We want to make sure we can use it somewhere. The next thing is to start to add some eccentric load to it. We want to get strong through these ranges, but adding this sort of load also gives us some permanence to our range of motion. A lot of range of motion stuff is temporary. Doing this sort of thing is actually going to change muscle at a physiological level. Once we've done these things, so phase 1, we're accessing range, getting strong. Phase 2, we're moving. Phase 3, we're adding eccentric strength and load. In phase 4, we want to start to add speed and make sure our movements are sport specific. So the exercise I spoke about before that we often see online, moving in and out, that's a trainable thing we can do, but we can also bring that speed into some of our training movements to make sure our brain has command over quickly causing muscles to contract. And that's where our power will come from. You know, surfing often requires us to draw power in awkward positions. So training just straight line exercises and straight jumps and these sort of things isn't ideal for the commands of surfing in terms of trying to explode out of these awkward angles. We can certainly train them by coming into these positions and trying to contract our muscles hard and fast. This could be through things like ballistic exercises or explosive isometrics and the like. There's a whole range of things we can do here. Hopefully I've given you a few things to think about there. You know, surfing really demands a methodology that understands what it needs. So just in summary, lower body strength is important, ankle movement is important, rear foot eversion is important, Bosu ball training probably doesn't really transfer the way we think it does. Also, understanding that we really need to make sure our body can meet prerequisites of the movements that we're going to find ourselves in surfing. We can access those things through in-range strength, isometrics, and the like. And we really want to be able to own the positions that we find ourselves in surfing. If you have any questions about this, please ask. I'm sure some of you are going to want to have a bit of a dig at me, and that's fine too. We'll chat about that. If you want your own plan on how to improve your surfing, whatever, also contact me about that, and I'll see you in the next one.